Picture a completely blank sealed cassette tape from the year 1990. It is a Sony Metal Master. There is absolutely no music on it. It is just a plastic shell housing a spool of magnetic ribbon encased in a ceramic composite. If you go on an auction site right now, you will likely see this blank piece of plastic selling for upwards of $250. If you keep scrolling through that same auction site, you might stumble upon a vintage Nakamichi Dragon tape deck. It's a heavy, brutalist piece of audio equipment from the 1980s, covered in knobs and dials that look like they belong in the cockpit of a commercial airliner. That machine regularly commands the price of a decent used car, easily crossing the $8,000 mark. This should immediately strike you as absurd. We are talking about a format that is almost universally remembered as a massive inconvenience. If you grew up with cassettes, your primary memory is probably not one of pristine audio fidelity. Your memory is likely the sound of a harsh, constant hiss in the background of your favorite songs. It's the visceral, frustrating memory of a cheap car stereo chewing up your favorite album, forcing you to pull over on the side of the road and carefully wind the mangled, crinkled brown ribbon back into the plastic shell using a yellow number 2 pencil. Cassettes were fragile. They melted if you left them on the dashboard in the summer sun. They jammed. They degraded every single time you played them. When the compact disc arrived, promising perfect, indestructible laser-read digital audio, society abandoned the cassette tape with zero hesitation. We threw them in shoeboxes, banished them to the attic, and never looked back. So why, decades later, in an era where you can stream virtually every song ever recorded in human history from a glass rectangle in your pocket, are hardcore audiophiles spending thousands of dollars to go backward? The answer is something that challenges everything we assume about technological progress. The truth is, the cassette tape, the general public remembers. The cheap, hissy plastic rectangles bought at gas stations. But that is not the cassette tape that audio engineers actually perfected. At its absolute zenith, analog magnetic tape possessed acoustic properties and physical limitations that make it sound fundamentally better, warmer, and significantly more dynamic than the heavily compressed digital streams we accept as the standard today. To understand why a cassette tape can actually beat a modern Spotify stream, we have to look at the forgotten golden era of analog superengineering. We have to look at the sheer brute force lunacy of machines like the Nakamichi Dragon. In the late 1970s and throughout the 1980s, audio companies were locked in a massive arms race. They weren't just trying to make consumer electronics. They were trying to conquer physics. The cassette tape had a fundamental, glaring mechanical flaw. Because the tape is physically dragged across a stationary metal playback head, the alignment has to be absolutely perfect. If the tape wanders even a fraction of a millimeter off-center, the microscopic magnetic tracks on the ribbon won't line up perfectly with the microscopic sensors on the head. In the audio world, this alignment is called azimuth. When the azimuth is off, even slightly, the high frequencies of the music simply vanish. The cymbals sound like they are underwater. The vocals lose all their crispness. The music sounds muffled and dead. Every single cassette shell ever manufactured was slightly different, meaning the tape would always wander. It was a seemingly unsolvable mechanical problem. Most companies just accepted this flaw as the cost of doing business. Nakamichi refused. To solve the azimuth problem, the engineers at Nakamichi did something that borders on madness. They designed the Dragon with a playback head that was split into multiple microscopic magnetic sensors. As the tape played, the machine constantly analyzed the phase differences between the left and right channels. If it detected that the high frequencies were starting to drift, it didn't just apply a digital EQ filter. It sent a signal to a tiny, incredibly precise mechanical motor hidden deep inside the chassis. That motor would physically push and pull the playback head, tilting it microscopic fractions of a degree in real time to perfectly match the wandering tape. It did this continuously, silently, thousands of times during a single song. They built a machine that physically fought the imperfections of the plastic shell, adapting its own mechanical geometry second by second to extract every single drop of audio data from the magnetic ribbon. It is a staggering piece of engineering. It is a prime example of brilliant minds ignoring manufacturing costs, ignoring common sense, and ignoring basic profitability, all in the relentless, obsessive pursuit of sonic perfection. But a super-engineered machine is only half of the equation. The real magic, the reason analog audio holds a profound advantage over digital streaming, lies in the chemistry of the tape itself. When you stream a song today, you are listening to digital data. It is code, ones and zeros. Digital audio is a miracle of convenience, but it operates inside a strict, unyielding mathematical box. In the digital realm, there is a hard ceiling for volume, known as 0 decibels full scale. If an audio signal exceeds that mathematical limit by even a fraction of a percent, the computer doesn't know what to do with the extra data. It simply chops off the top of the sound wave. This is called digital clipping. It is a harsh, jagged, incredibly unpleasant sound. It is a mathematical error that human ears find actively grating. Magnetic tape does not have a mathematical ceiling. It is a physical medium. When you look at a high-end cassette, specifically the legendary Type 4 metal cassettes like that $250 Sony Metal Master, you are not looking at rust glued to plastic. You are looking at pure, unoxidized iron particles suspended in a microscopic binder. Manufacturing these tapes was incredibly dangerous. The pure iron dust was highly reactive and prone to spontaneous combustion on the factory floor. But they took the risk because pure iron can hold a massive magnetic charge. When you push an audio signal really hard onto a high-quality metal tape, something beautiful happens. When the volume exceeds the tape's optimal limits, it doesn't digitally clip. It doesn't throw a mathematical error. Instead, the physical iron particles become fully magnetized. They simply cannot hold any more magnetic energy. So, what happens to that excess volume? The tape absorbs it. Through a phenomenon known as tape saturation, the medium physically compresses the sound wave. It rounds off the harsh peaks of the audio. It introduces a complex web of even-order harmonic distortion. To a computer, this is technically an error, but to the human ear, it sounds like magic. Tape saturation creates a natural, incredibly rich warmth. It makes drums sound punchier and fatter. It smooths out harsh, biting vocals and makes them sound intimate and present. It acts as a natural, physical shock absorber for the music. We are biologically wired to find this specific type of analog distortion pleasing. It is the audio equivalent of a glowing fireplace in a dark room. Code simply cannot replicate it. Software plugins try to emulate it, but mimicking the physical chaos of billions of iron particles interacting with a magnetic field in real time is a puzzle that algorithms still struggle to solve convincingly. And this technical reality leads us directly into the darkest chapter of modern music production, a phenomenon that proves exactly why the limitations of the cassette tape were actually its greatest hidden feature. We need to talk about the loudness war. When the music industry fully transitioned to digital audio, primarily with the compact disc and later with digital files, mastering engineers were suddenly handed a format with an incredibly low noise floor and massive dynamic range. They had infinite headroom to play with. But instead of using that headroom to create beautifully dynamic records, the industry executives realized something else. Digital allowed them to make music artificially loud. There is a psychological trick built into the human brain. When we hear two identical pieces of audio, but one is slightly louder than the other, our brains automatically perceive the louder one as sounding better. It sounds more exciting, more energetic. Record labels weaponized this psychological quirk. They wanted their songs to jump out of the radio speakers and grab the listener's attention faster than the competing track playing on the next station. So, mastering engineers were instructed to push the volume higher and higher. But you can't just turn up the master volume knob, because eventually, you hit that digital ceiling and the audio clips. To get around this, engineers started using heavy digital compression and aggressive brick wall limiters. They took the quietest parts of a song, the gentle intro, the soft vocal breath, the subtle acoustic guitar, and artificially boosted them to be almost as loud as the massive drum fills and the screaming guitar solos. Then, they took a digital razor blade and shaved off the dynamic peaks so the entire track could be pushed right up against the absolute mathematical limit of 0 decibels. The result? The music became agonizingly loud, but it lost all of its life. Dynamic range, the emotional distance between the quietest whisper and the loudest explosion in a piece of music, was completely obliterated. Modern streaming platforms are filled with music that is essentially a solid rectangular brick of noise. It hits you in the face immediately, but after a few minutes, it becomes incredibly fatiguing to listen to. It is exhausting because your ears never get a chance to rest. There is no ebb and flow. There is no breathing room. This is where the cassette tape proves its ultimate superiority. The cassette tape actually sounds better today precisely because its physical limitations forced the music industry to respect the art of dynamics. You simply could not master a track to be blisteringly, aggressively loud on a cassette. If you tried to apply modern brick wall limiting and push the volume into the red, the tape would physically reject it. The iron particles would distort so heavily that the song would become unlistenable mush. The format itself acted as a physical safeguard against algorithmic compression. When you listen to a well-mastered album on a high-end cassette deck, you are hearing the music exactly as it was meant to be heard. You are hearing the deep, silent valleys and the soaring, dramatic peaks. The medium demanded restraint. It demanded that the engineer leave room for the music to breathe. Spotify, with its cold, limitless digital delivery, has no such physical safeguards. The algorithm doesn't care if the music breathes. It only cares that the stream doesn't interrupt. But what about the hiss? That was always the ultimate argument against analog tape. The constant rushing sound of tape noise. This brings us to the final, tragic technological triumph of the analog era. A highly advanced noise reduction system called Dolby S. Most people remember Dolby B, a crude filter that cut out the hiss but also muffled the high frequencies, making the music sound like it was playing under a heavy blanket. But in the early 1990s, Dolby released a consumer version of their multi-million-dollar professional studio noise reduction system. Dolby S was a masterpiece of psychoacoustic engineering. It didn't just blanket the high frequencies. It actively tracked the music across multiple frequency bands, dynamically reducing the noise floor exactly where the human ear was most sensitive to it, while leaving the high-end sparkle completely untouched. A high-quality metal cassette, recorded on a Nakamichi deck and played back with Dolby S, is a revelation. It possesses the pristine, absolute dead silence of a compact disc, but it retains all of the massive, punchy, harmonic warmth of pure analog tape. It was the perfect format. It was the absolute pinnacle of a century of audio engineering. But it arrived in 1992. The world was already completely mesmerized by the shiny convenience of the CD. The Walkman was being replaced by the Discman. The MP3 was just around the corner. Dolby S was an unparalleled technological triumph delivered to an entirely empty room. The brilliant engineers who spent their lives perfecting magnetic tape finally solved the puzzle, only to watch the world throw the puzzle away because digital was simply easier to carry. And so, we loop back to the beginning. We return to that $250 blank piece of plastic and that $8,000 mechanical behemoth from Nakamichi. When you understand the history, the physics, and the sheer engineering audacity behind these objects, you realize they are not just pieces of hipster nostalgia. They are not overpriced props for an aesthetic Instagram post. They are vastly superior, super-engineered artifacts from a timeline where music was an active, deliberate experience, rather than a passive utility. Spotify and Apple Music offer infinite availability. You have 30 million songs floating in the cloud, ready to be summoned by a voice command. But infinite availability inevitably breeds inattention. When music is everywhere, it slowly stops meaning anything. It becomes sonic wallpaper. It is something we put on in the background while we answer emails, do the dishes, or scroll mindlessly through social media. If a song doesn't grab our fractured attention within the first 3 seconds, we simply swipe the glass screen, and the algorithm feeds us the next heavily compressed brick of noise. The cassette tape demands a ritual. It is a physical, tactile object. It clunks, it whirs, it has a limited runtime. You have to physically open a heavy, damped aluminum door, insert the cartridge, and press a mechanical button with a satisfying heavy click. You have to commit to the album. You cannot easily skip a track, and when side A finishes, the machine stops. The silence forces you to stand up, walk across the room, take the tape out, flip it over, and actively choose to continue the experience. It demands your attention. It demands your time. It demands that you sit down and engage with the art as a deliberate act. We traded the warmth, the dynamic range, and the profound physical ritual of analog audio for the cold, weightless convenience of digital streaming. We gained everything, but we lost the friction that made the experience feel real. The machines built to conquer those physical limitations remain as monuments to a time when we cared deeply enough to engineer perfection out of rust and plastic, the perceived flaws of analog. The physical limitations, the mechanical friction, the deliberate pace, were actually its greatest strengths all along. It leaves you with a rather uncomfortable question to ponder the next time you put in your wireless earbuds and let an algorithm decide what you hear next. With all this infinite convenience at your fingertips, exactly when was the last time you truly sat down, did absolutely nothing else, and just listened?